What is good, guys? So this week we are starting things off in the world of anabolics, PEDs and enhancements by taking a little look at my recommendations for your first cycle, or at least how we should logically and constructively look at this next stage in your journey, which can always and more often than not be a conflicting time for anyone, you know, making that decision to go enhanced, to use PEDs and enhancements. And there's a lot of conflicting data. There's a lot of miscommunicated information out there, especially in regard to the steroid world, anabolics and androgenic steroids. So it's important that we approach this phase with the right education, the right guidance, and we are very meticulous in, you know, really prioritizing health and longevity for anyone thinking of going down this route or taking this journey. Now, a few things to consider, obviously, on the ethical standpoint of whether you should or should not do a cycle or go down that road. Now, this is completely individual to every single person, right? There is no right or wrong answer to this, right? It's simply just down to whether the risks associated are worth the reward you're going to get out of this situation. So if you're thinking, right, you want to start chasing a career as a bodybuilder, you want to see how far you can go within this world and maybe one day chase a pro status, then the chances are you've already kind of understood and are settled with the fact that you're probably going to have to use PEDs and enhancements along your journey, whether you at the beginning or later on in a career, whether you make that jump early or not. At some point you've settled with the fact that there's only very few genetic individuals that can achieve pro status as a natural individual. Sadly, as science and as the world has progressed and moved forward, as has bodybuilding, and as has the expectations and limits of what the human body or the human physique can get to, and obviously that has escalated over time. PEDs and enhancements has got more and more further down that rabbit hole, and the physiques we're now seeing within pro bodybuilding are, you know, far past what any natural individual could ever hope to achieve. So long as ethically you see that the reward that you're getting out of this journey is worth the possible and also semi-preventable health risks that can be associated with PED and enhancement usage, then who is anyone else to argue whether you do or do not do it? I'm simply here just to kind of lay out a plan for those of you that are firstly, you know, starting here we go. First fumble of the day, guys. First fumble of the day. It's all good. It's only like the 4th attempt. We're all good. So just lay out some considerations and recommendations for how you should approach this time period in regard to dosaging, compound, and duration of exposure. And these are all things that we'll consider. But hopefully, instead of me just saying, this is what I think you should do, A, B, C, boom, I'm going to lay out my thought process, where I'm coming from, what angle I'm coming from, and hopefully kind of challenge you to think a bit more logically about how you're going to approach this phase. So firstly, just like to clarify here, so this video is simply targeted at male enhancement here. Female enhancement practice is a separate video entirely, and there's a few more things to consider when we start diving down that rabbit hole and looking at that journey, which will come a little bit later on in the series, as and when we've covered more of the basics from the male side first, before we take that dive. But of course, if female enhancements is something that you are interested in or a topic of conversation you would like to have, then by all means contact me via the comment section or hit me up on my Instagram, GW Physique, drop me a message. We can get you in for a consultation and we can dive down the female enhancement route a little bit sooner. But as I said, at some point we will be taking that dive a little bit later on the channel. But yeah, so male enhancement today. And the first things that we really should understand, and that is quite important, is where do the parameters sit for a natural individual, so for a natural male. So in regards to testosterone levels, we can say that they are sat somewhere between the 270 nanograms per deciliter and 1070 nanograms per deciliter. That is the rough range, okay? So we could probably say, what, between 300 and 1000 nanograms per deciliter. So with this information, we need to simply sit outside of this upper limit in order to be in that super physiological realm. Now, how much do we need to take in order to be past that upper limit? And another thing to consider is, well, how much is too much then? You know, in theory, the more testosterone you take, or the more anabolics and androgenics, steroids you use, essentially the bigger you will get. Now, there is a conversation to be had within: the more you take, the higher risk you are at, and therefore the negative health effects will obviously increase, or the chances of them will increase as you escalate dose over time. Again, how far you push things in life comes down to an ethical standpoint. How much is your health? You know, how much do you value your health? How much do you value your time, longevity, etc.? And again, things that we can take a look at later on. So, 2 questions straight away. So, how much do we need to be out of the natural limit, and how much would then be too much outside of that realm? So, where do we begin looking? Well, firstly, we should look at where in the real world, in a clinical setting, do people use exogenous testosterone. So testosterone given to the body via an external source other than our own natural way of producing it. And straight away, we would then be pointed to hormone replacement therapy in slightly older male individuals. And we know that clinically, for a male to be put onto HRT, hormone replacement therapy, that is somewhere within the realm of 125 milligrams per week of testosterone. Now, this is on average, because as we progress further and start looking deeper into the mechanism of actions, how these things associate and work within these pathways, you'll see that there's a hell of a lot of genetic individuality in between where this HRT dose actually lies. Now, all they are doing in practice is taking an average of where most males' upper limit sits, but in theory, your actual natural testosterone could have been somewhere down here, but it could also be somewhere up here. This is just the average recommended limit for HRT. So it seems like a very good place to start thus anyway. So as I said, in order to be super physiological, or within that realm of pro hormones, or more than a natural male, we need to simply sit above this limit here. So if this limit here at the 1070 nanograms per deciliter can be replicated with 125 milligrams per week of exogenous testosterone, we simply need to do more than 125 mgs per week to be out of that limit. Now, a good escalation, or first escalation, to be outside of that limit into the realm of low risk, still fairly low reward, but enough to be out and in to say that we are enhanced. A good starting point could be somewhere between 150 milligrams to 200 milligrams per week. Extremely safe. You are just outside of that upper limit, but enough as a first time user to get quite a significant amount of benefit and reward from that low risk, low reward profile there. We know that in order to be within that realm of super physiological dosing, we need to be above 125 mgs per week. So 150, surely that's outside of the realm. Then that would be a good place to start, no? But where is the line drawn for too much? You know, can we use 1,000, 2,000, 10,000? You know, how long is a piece of string? How do we know where that cutoff is? And that is dictated by a few genetic components. Your ability to convert testosterone into free testosterone, estrogen, and DHT respectively, which differs from person to person, and also the level of testosterone to estrogen, and that ratio. As you increase your testosterone dose, estrogen will rise with it. At what point do they close the gap, or does the gap get further? A few different things that will all have and play in. So, estrogenic side effects. These are things like gynecomastia, or gyno, the development of breast tissue behind the male nipple, fluid retention, and severe, excruciatingly unstable emotions. All signs of high estrogen. So that we now know that is going to be different between individuals because of the individuality between conversion rates of testosterone into the 3 derivatives, free testosterone, estrogen, and dihydrotestosterone respectively. How does this help us when looking at your dosage specifically? Well, a good fail-safe method here for you to discover where your own upper limit of testosterone, exogenous testosterone, lies is simply to escalate or titrate the testosterone dose over time till you reach the point of negative estrogenic feedback, to which you would just simply scale back to a place where you was comfortable without exhibiting estrogenic side effects, and you could then say that this is your own upper limit. This is how far you can push testosterone before you get the negative feedback. So you could say that this is just your maximum base dose, or a good starting basal of any of your future cycles, whatever this number is. So how do we find that number? So here's my considerations and my recommendations of how to navigate this phase. Now, starting point, I would simply start with 150 milligrams of testosterone administered per week. Now, personally, I would microdose and administer daily. Some people prefer to dose it with the longer esters as they will, but again, that's another conversation that we can dive into in a later video. So, starting at 150 milligrams per week, I would start with that dose and leave it at 150 for 12 weeks. Then after 12 weeks, I would then look to escalate my dose up 50 milligrams to 200 mg per week. Again, I would then sit like that for another 12 weeks before then considering increasing the dose, titrating it up 50 mgs every 12 weeks until I reached that point where I started to receive that negative estrogenic feedback. So let's say you've been escalating for 12-week periods at a time, and eventually you get to, say, 400 milligrams of exogenous testosterone per week. And at coming towards the end of them 12 weeks, you start to notice some negative estrogenic feedback. Quite simply, all you do is then scale back to the previous dose, so from 400 back to 350, and you can now say that this is an accurate estimation of relatively close to where your upper limit is, and that thus 350 mg of testosterone is your start point and your base of your cycle and your stack design. You've reached that upper limit, you found that limit, and you now know that as a solid concrete number. Now let's have a little think about the duration of this first cycle. Now, realistically, your first cycle should be your last. If you're talking on the grounds of doing the least damage to your body and your HPTA axis, then realistically you should not come off of steroids. You should use them for the duration of time that is deemed necessary to achieve whatever the goal is, whether that's to become pro, bodybuild for the rest of your life, or whether it was just for a quick IB for prep. You know, again, ethically, I don't care what your reasoning is, but when you start using enhancements, you should be using them with the mentality that this is long term. You're going to be using these consistently for a long time, years, 5, 6, 10, 20 years of your life, before coming to the point wherever you go, I'm done now, I don't need to use these anymore, I'm now going to come off and I'm going to allow my HPTA axis to restart and see where my natural hormone production lies. And if you reach the point where, you know, you're in your 40s, then you're going to benefit from HRT anyway, so you'd probably just you know, reduce your dose down to HRT and just see that through for the rest of your life anyway. But just talking for safety practice, you shouldn't be shutting down your HPTA, you know, for 12 weeks and then trying to restart it with some ludicrous PCT protocol, just to then shut it back down, you know, a month or two later when you jump back on again. So just realistically, if you're going to start, make sure you understand that it's not short term and that this is a long term commitment if you want to do it the safest and most healthiest way. So now that you've got that upper limit of your own genetic individual base level of testosterone, where do you go from here? And again, this will lead you on for the next episode, guys, but essentially now you can start looking at other compounds that are going to increase that level of androgen hormone within your blood higher without exhibiting any of them negative estrogenic side effects and feedback. But yes, guys, we will jump back onto stack design and where to go next in future videos. And that is a little wrap up of how you should really be thinking around your first cycle, how to think, you know, externally, outside the box. Look at some real life application where exogenous testosterone is used clinically. It's always a good place to start when you're considering or looking into these things. And then my recommendations for how you should then attack and navigate this journey. But yeah, guys,